Mr. Speaker, in St. Lucia and in many countries throughout the world, cannabis is illegal. The Drugs Prevention of Misuse Act, Cap 3.02, has outlawed the possession, use, and interaction with cannabis and cannabis resin on our shores for many years. The status of this plant and the illegality associated with its possession, cultivation, and consumption was done at the behest of larger, more developed global interests. It is they who categorize it inherently as dangerous and void of any value or benefit, medicinal or otherwise. After years of this thinking, Mr. Speaker, in 2014, the CARICOM heads of government, at its 25th intersessional meeting in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, mandated the establishment of a CARICOM Cannabis Commission to examine the possibility of reform to the legal regimes regulating cannabis in the CARICOM countries. The well-researched and worded report of the CARICOM Cannabis Commission noted, among other things, that the very basis of the treatment of the cannabis plant, which, Mr. Speaker, I will remind you, was its lack of medical or other benefit, was incorrect. Mr. Speaker, though research continues to evidence that there are negative effects and possible dangers of use of cannabis by the youth and portions of the population, research has and continues to confirm that the plant has considerable medicinal value. Scientists have in recent years taken a critical look at the plant, Mr. Speaker, and derived empirical specific data suggesting that many of the negative assertions made against the plant were either ill-founded or incorrect. Mr. Speaker, while scientists have spent the last 15 years determining that the cannabis plant was incorrectly classified, many nations within our region have reviewed the prohibition on cannabis and allowed for cannabis to be produced and used. While the negative physiological impact of cannabis was better understood and the great gateway drug theory was being disapproved, Mr. Speaker, 33 U.S. states were reclassifying cannabis and allowing for its medical use. While the dangers of alcohol were being examined as against that of cannabis, countries were legalizing cannabis for personal use by the adult population, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while some of the very same global interests who colored the perception of the plant are reassessing the restriction on cannabis, St. Lucia maintains penalties ranging from 3 years in prison or a fine of $100,000 on summary conviction, or 14 years in prison or a fine of $200,000 on indictment. Mr. Speaker, 70% of inmates admitted for cannabis-related offenses were between the ages of 20 to 35, and over 50% of these had a secondary or tertiary level education. Mr. Speaker, over 90% of those convicted and imprisoned for cannabis were employed. Therefore, it would seem that this regime succeeds in robbing us of young, able, contributing members to our society and economy. Mr. Speaker, while persons in the Americas and Europe use the plant in various forms and allow the development of multi-billion-dollar industries in their respective countries, an economic analysis has shown that criminalization of cannabis has been ineffective in reducing its use, even among the youth, and comes at a cost of $3.6 million to the economy. It would seem, Mr. Speaker, that a punitive criminal justice system and an unregulated criminal market, which is a product of the war on drugs, has failed. Studies have shown drugs, including cannabis, alcohol, and many others, are most effectively managed within a responsibly regulated public health framework. Cognizant of the tides of change, Mr. Speaker, and calls from the public and other stakeholders, the government of St. Lucia, being mindful of the need for reform concerning its cannabis laws, approved the establishment of a Cannabis Commission on July 29, 2019. The Commission was mandated to consult and provide recommendations on the design of a new legislative and regulatory framework consistent with the government's commitment to regulate and restrict access to cannabis. Mr. Speaker, the Commission comprised individuals and representatives from the following agencies and groups. Mr. Speaker, I will name the names for your information. Mr. Michael Gordon QC, Attorney at Law, was the chairperson. Tricia Sipal, representative of the Attorney General Chambers. Dylan Norbert Inglis, representative of the Ministry of Commerce. Kemuel Jabatis, representative of the Ministry of Agriculture. Felix Sandhill, representative of the Ministry of Health. Benson de Turville, representative of the Ministry of Home Affairs. Fridora Justin Alcindor, representative of the Ministry of Equity. Moses Jabatis, representative of the Leader of the Opposition. Vernita Thomas, representative of Invest St. Lucia. Andre Decarius, representative of the Cannabis Movement. Joel Henry, representative of the National Youth Council. Paul Francis, representative of the Ayanola Council for the Advancement of Rastafari. And Clement Fauché, representative of the Ayanola Council for the Advancement of Rastafari. Mr. Speaker, the members of the Commission offered a range of perspectives on the cannabis issue and appreciated the significance of the need to review the law on cannabis. The terms of reference submitted to the Commission provided that the protection of young and vulnerable and protection of public health and safety were paramount. Mr. Speaker, the Commission benefited from the expertise of an economic consultant who provided an economic analysis of the cannabis regime and industry, a medical expert who afforded the Commission insight into medical issues, perspective, and pertinent considerations, the Performance Management and Delivery Unit, PMDU, Advanced Intellectual Methods, Marketing Consultancy, and a number of work groups consisted of skilled and experienced persons from various fields. An aggressive marketing and communication campaign, Mr. Speaker, aimed at sensitizing the public on the role of the Commission and to gauge public sentiment on the issue was also implemented through various social media platforms, public service announcements, billboard ads, and an appearance on a radio talk show. Furthermore, a simple survey was run through digital media channels with the question, do you think that a regulated cannabis industry would be beneficial to St. Lucia? Mr. Speaker, 73% or 948 of respondents answered in the affirmative. Mr. Speaker, prior to submitting its final report, the St. Lucia Cannabis Commission undertook a series of consultations to which members of the public were invited to express their views on the issue of cannabis. Mr. Speaker, community meetings were held in Ancillary, Castries, Babonneau, Soufrière, Vieux-Fort, Grosley, and Dennery. These meetings, Mr. Speaker, were attended by parents, teachers, community leaders, farmers, the youth, and the police throughout each of the respective communities. The overwhelming majority of attendees, Mr. Speaker, indicated support for the revision of the existing regime and the exploration of or examination of a regulated and controlled legalized regime. Mr. Speaker, it must be noted that none of the attendees of the community meetings opposed the revision of the cannabis regime. Many expressed, however, that in the development of any framework or introduction of a cannabis industry, whether for medicinal, religious, or personal use, provision must be made for the protection of the youth, the vulnerable, small farmer, and the Rastafarian community. Mr. Speaker, upon presentation of the report to Cabinet, Cabinet further requested a national consultation to complement the Cannabis Commission report and to include key stakeholders who had not taken the opportunity of expressing their views in the initial consultation process. Mr. Speaker, focus group consultations were then done virtually with professional groups, government, departments, agencies, faith-based organizations, and the youth. And these included, Mr. Speaker, Group 1, faith-based organizations, 42 participants. Group 2, youth and sporting groups, 30 participants. Group 3, which comprises of the St. Lucia Bar Association, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, St. Lucia Bankers Association, St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association, the Pharmacy Council of St. Lucia, St. Lucia Allied Health Council, and the St. Lucia Nurses Association, which included 27 participants in total, Mr. Speaker. Group 4, government bodies and other agencies, which included 44 participants, to include Export St. Lucia Hotel and Tourism Association, St. Lucia Manufacturers Association, St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce, Agriculture and Industry, St. Lucia Coalition of Services, government ministries and departments. Mr. Speaker, a national consultation was also hosted, which was televised and streamed live on NTN and the Government of St. Lucia Facebook and YouTube pages. The presentations were well received, with many expressing their interest and appreciation of the work done to date by the Commission. The participants, Mr. Speaker, seemed to be genuinely interested in the information provided and seemed to embrace the idea of possibly reviewing the current laws on cannabis. There were many suggestions, Mr. Speaker, including manufacturing of not just cannabis and cannabidiol oil, CBD oils. Mr. Speaker, the general concerns expressed were the abuse of cannabis used by the youth and the farmers, and Rastafarians being marginalized by the creation of the new industry. The religious groups, though hesitant at first, agreed that once properly regulated, the initiative could be of benefit to the economy. Opinions and suggestions regarding cannabis regulations, market control, criminal records, educational programs were all noted. Mr. Speaker, at a starting point, the Commission recommends that cases where persons incarcerated at the Bordelais Correctional Facility, whether on remand or serving sentences related to the infraction of the Drugs Prevention of Misuse Act, be reviewed by a committee appointed pursuant to the terms of Section 74 and 75 of the Constitution of St. Lucia. Where it is found that simple possession is the reason for incarceration, then the person should be pardoned or the charges dropped. The Commission further suggests that retroactivity be used to correct past injustices, such as expungement of criminal records. Other recommendations that were made, Mr. Speaker, was that cannabis, marijuana, should be declassified as a dangerous drug or narcotic in all legislation and reclassified as a controlled substance. CARICOM states should act to remove prohibition status for cannabis, marijuana, substituting the current prohibitive criminal sanction regime with legal and social policy that emphasizes public health, education, and human rights. CARICOM states should have a margin of appreciation as to how to achieve this ultimate goal, either complete and immediate removal of all prohibitive legal provisions, thereby rendering cannabis, marijuana a legal substance which is regulated only in strictly defined circumstances, or, as a preparatory step, the decriminalization of cannabis, marijuana for personal use in private premises and for medical purposes. Full prohibition for children and adolescents with an appropriate age limit should be maintained, except for medical reasons. However, young people who use marijuana will be directed to treatment and diversion programs rather than being prosecuted or criminalized. The law, Mr. Speaker, should enact legal definitions of hemp based on low tetrahydrocannabinol or THC levels, and make clear distinctions between hemp and other varieties of cannabis, and ensuring that all legal sanctions be removed from hemp and hemp production. Legislation should provide for the protection of seeds, strains of cannabis through intellectual property mechanisms. Customs law should be amended to make provision for the import and export of cannabis and cannabis products as appropriate. To avoid the implications of anti-money laundering and proceeds of crime legislation, which currently prohibit legitimate banking and other financial transactions for illegal cannabis, commercial cannabis activities will need to be legalized. There should be a limit on the set amount of cannabis legally in the possession of any person at any one time. The Commission recommends a limit of 30 grams. Possession of larger amounts should create criminal liability varying in intensity based on the amount in excess. Small farmers and small business persons should be included in production and supply arrangements with appropriate controls limiting large enterprise and foreign involvement. An equitable land use policy for marijuana cultivation should be formulated. Special provision should be made to protect religious rights in the new regime. Retroactivity should be used as a tool to correct past injustices such as expungement of criminal records and CSME rules. Restrictions that support no public smoking and vaping of cannabis in alignment with tobacco smoking and vaping restrictions should be adopted. Cannabis and marijuana use should be banned in public spaces with appropriate exceptions for Rastafarians on religious grounds. Such restrictions should include prohibiting use in the workplace, enclosed public spaces, on health authority and school board property, transit shelters, common areas of apartment, building and community care facilities. In particular, Mr. Speaker, measures that ban consumption in places frequented by children should be adopted. States should regulate the location of marijuana retail establishments by ensuring an appropriate distance from playgrounds and schools, and also prohibiting stores that sell other products to minors from selling marijuana. Regulations should be aimed at reducing the likelihood of children accidentally ingesting marijuana. States with legal marijuana can regulate the appearance, packaging, and labeling of products likely to be appealing to youth, such as marijuana-infused candy and baked goods. Limit marijuana's appeal by implementing restrictions on marketing through traditional media, such as billboards, televisions, radios, and newspaper. Retail availability of marijuana should be tightly regulated. States should develop licensing policies applying to all actors in the recreational marijuana supply chain, including retailers. Apply limits of allowable THC in products. Drug driving regulations should be created. Ensure appropriate and reasonable pricing to deter consumers from purchasing cannabis through illegal means. Moderate taxes should be imposed, taking care that the black market is not reinvigorated. Availability of cannabis should be limited by placing caps on retail density and hours of sale. Environmental conservation and preservation must guide commercial marijuana activities. Public education programs should be prioritized. A data collection system to track processes and outcomes should be established. Regular performance evaluations should be conducted to guide policy refinements. Mr. Speaker, in the liberalized regime for cannabis or marijuana, its availability as medicine should take into consideration the following. Access to medical marijuana should be made for qualifying conditions in which there is a clear evidence of its therapeutic effects and for debilitating life-threatening conditions that are intractable to treatment in which there is evidence of possible benefits. For example, disastrous and intractable seizures in children. The smoking of marijuana should be discouraged except in persons with terminal conditions in which benefits may outweigh the risk. Measures should be put in place to regulate the market to minimize diversion into the illegal market, example, track and trace systems. Measures should be put in place to support public health education, prevention, and treatment. A comprehensive and effective sustained health education campaign should be made priority moving forward. Ministry of Health should facilitate all key stakeholders in a comprehensive substance abuse mitigation strategy that would address risk factors. Support for research to explore and confirm beneficial and harmful effects of marijuana. Mr. Speaker, with that being said, Mr. Speaker, and now that all the consultations has been complete, the Cabinet of Ministers charged with the information that I have summarized today, we believe that it is sufficiently informed to make a decision on the matter and undertakes, Mr. Speaker, to examine all the information and in short order advise on the way forward with respect to a cannabis framework in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I wish to take the time to thank all the members of the Cannabis Commission and all who took part in the various consultations for the contribution, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward, Mr. Speaker, for the advancement of the various recommendations that were made. Thank you very much.